I mean, I'm 7 years away from being able to access my pension. If I get to a point where I think I could sell some of my sats and it would allow me to finish work sooner and enjoy more of my time while I'm at a reasonable age, healthy, fit, wanting to go and travel and do things, then that would be great, and spend more time with the children. If Bitcoin goes up 2, 3, 5, 10 times, you can take that fiat, you could sell that fund to realise that fiat gain and take that fiat out completely tax-free and buy that car or pay that deposit for the house that you want to move into because you're getting married, having kids, whatever it may be. If I just stack and stack and stack and stack, what's the point of that in the end? Because if I die and just leave it to my kids, you don't necessarily need to go crazy and go all in. But if you're just buying some, if you're not earning much money and don't have much left over, but you're putting some of that in Bitcoin, the big challenge for Gen Z is growing up in a fiat world that is at the end of its reign.
Hi, Gary. How are you doing? Everything fine on your end?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. Thanks, Robin. Thanks for having me on again. It's good to see you.
Absolutely, yeah. It's and you have done a conference. I really wanted to go, but like it's super hard to go to all the conferences. How's it been to host a Bitcoin conference? How's it been to be so involved in the Bitcoin space?
Yeah, it was amazing actually. So we did that at the end of September. A friend of mine, I now call him a friend, even though I only met him just over a year ago, but he started doing meetups in and around my local hometown. I stumbled upon that only, as I say, just over a year ago. It was my first meetup. And then come April time, I'd met a lot more Bitcoiners and locally, and just said to Jace, who'd started the meetups, we should just do a conference. Like, why? Who else is going to do it if we don't do it? And at the same time, I started my podcast as well, which you were kind enough to come on quite early days. But yeah, it's been a massive learning curve, but it was phenomenal. We sold over 160 tickets, had about 30 speakers in a really nice old Georgian building in the centre of Bury St Edmunds. So many people came to our little town for the first time and discovered it and said how nice it was, as well as just the best thing of probably any conference is just spending time around Bitcoiners.
And it's interesting for me because it is, so like this is in the UK, it was a UK conference, and Bitcoin in UK, especially from American Bitcoiners, I always hear like there's this digital ID going on, there's like all the social media things going on, and also in Bitcoin, you don't really hear a lot from like the politician level, but then there's so many great Bitcoiners in the UK and so many strong Bitcoiners in the UK. And I feel like the grassroots movement is also strong, like the grassroots adoption in the UK. It seems like there's a big disconnect of what's going on with the population there and what's going on with the politics there, if I see that correctly.
Yeah, I think as ever, when you look on social media, you often get a very specific lens. So there are some not great things happening in the UK right now, but if you walk down the high street in Bury St Edmunds, you'd be oblivious to a lot of those things because either it's not really happening in our town or it's just not happening at that point in time. So when you turn on the TV or you go onto social media and see riots in the streets and people throwing bricks through windows or whatever it may be, it's not to diminish that and say it's not happening, but that isn't a picture of the UK. You know, that's often what people who live outside the UK see because it pops up, because it's clickbait in Twitter or whatever, but that's not everyday occurrences in the country.
I guess social media is really magnifying the problem sometimes because without social media, we wouldn't even know about those things. And so they weren't so there for us. And then it's like with social media, we have all the problems, even if it's like a small town somewhere in the UK or like it's one small district of the UK in the city. And then all of UK seems to be like just that because that's what the feed kind of shows you.
Yeah, absolutely. And back to your other point around Bitcoin in the UK, yes, there are massive challenges around how it's treated by the government and, to a lesser extent now, the FCA, who are the kind of financial conduct authority who recently relaxed the rules on having Bitcoin ETNs in the UK. But that was only a couple of weeks ago. Up until then, it had been banned for a number of years. But the other thing that made our conference slightly different was it was predominantly UK speakers. So it was pretty much a UK panel of 30 speakers. And what we did intentionally was really try and make the talks predominantly panel discussions. And the great feedback we had from the attendees and the speakers was it was just so engaging to be part of on the stage and to be as an attendee in the audience listening. So rather than having a keynote speaker reading off a script that you've probably seen on YouTube before, actually you'd have an in-depth conversation, live conversation with 4 people, 5 people on stage talking about Bitcoin mining or Bitcoin for creatives and all these different subjects and topics. So it just made for I think what we aimed for was very grassroots and authentic, but with kind of high professional production. And I think we kind of landed that, and it worked really well.
Anything that stood out to you, like interesting talks that you remember?
It was so varied. I think the one I really liked was we did one Bitcoin for Future Generations. So we had Claire Chisholm, who's the principal of Lomond School, the first school in the UK and I think possibly Europe to accept Bitcoin payments for school fees, as well as Claire Prince, the wife of Daniel Prince, Caitlin Prince, who is Daniel Prince's daughter. She's at university. A guy called Harley Etchelin, who does a Bitcoin youth podcast in the UK, and Sam Duval, who is quite well known in Bitcoin. But so the age of that panel, there was a 14-year-old, a 19-year-old, and a 20-year-old. So to hear those young but absolutely passionate, articulate, forward-thinking voices on a stage talking about Bitcoin and the future of Bitcoin for them and their lives and how they want to take it forward was great, because a lot of Bitcoin talks can often be what I am, middle-aged white man, bit of a TradFi background, and they get up on stage and talk. And there's places for that, of course, but to have that variety of voices and people who haven't even got up on stage before, giving them that opportunity and hearing what they've got to say was fantastic.
It is so interesting because my audience is on average about your age. So about like twice my age, maybe a little less than that. So I think like 45 is around the average age. And so I'm 27. So that's about 20 years older. And I'm Gen Z, and there's like almost no Gen Z in my audience. There's like the millennials strongly, and all the above millennials also very strongly, and I think even above 65 quite strong. And so I see Bitcoin really as a huge chance for Gen Z. Obviously, the more money you have, the bigger the problem Bitcoin is solving for you. If you don't have any money, it doesn't really solve a lot of problems. So that's why also if you're like 18 years old now, Bitcoin isn't that interesting for you just because like you don't have any money. Like what does Bitcoin do for you? Especially if you're in the West, especially if you are in the UK or like in Europe or in America, because there the banking system just for transacting works. Like you have a bank account, you transact. Like there's not a huge pain point currently that is Bitcoin solving. That is different in Nigeria. That is different in other places in the world. And so that's, I think, the only reason why, or like one of the major reasons why there's so much happening in Bitcoin from, as you said, like middle-aged men, because they have just the most money. So they have the biggest problem to deal with, and they have the most money to lose. And that's where Bitcoin becomes the biggest solver for that. But I truly think Gen Z has a huge chance of stepping up and having Bitcoin as a chance to basically build what maybe boomers built with real estate way, way better and way, way bigger with Bitcoin. And so I don't know how you look at the whole generation thing, but I think Bitcoin is a huge chance for Gen Z, even though currently Gen Z does not have that much money.
Yeah, I think there's a few things to unpack there. Boomers making money in real estate, I think that's a really good analogy, because lots of boomers didn't, because they didn't buy real estate. Some boomers went all in and they bought their house, borrowed more money, bought a flat, rented that out, borrowed more money against that as the price went up. And over a period of 10, 15 years, maybe they built together a property portfolio of 20 properties. The analogy I would say for that is it's the same as for Gen Z in Bitcoin. You don't necessarily need to go crazy and go all in, but if you're just buying some right now with, if you're not earning much money and don't have much left over, but you're putting some of that in Bitcoin, a lot of your age group aren't doing that. So you set yourself above the average by just putting something in. And because you have a lower time preference, you're not considering retiring and not working for a long time yet. Actually, the compound benefit of growth of Bitcoin means by the time you're 40, that amount that you're putting away from now is going to be potentially generational wealth.
And I think that's very true, because if you think about now, let's take a young Gen Z guy that maybe is like 16 or 17 years old now, that just got started with work. If he is extremely vigilant and extremely strong in the conviction of Bitcoin and puts everything into Bitcoin, and also works tirelessly to generate more skills, to generate more workable things that he can actually put towards the working force or towards the society, like just provide more value. Like that's I think the easiest way to say that. If he does that for the next 12 years of accumulating Bitcoin, being really, really humble in like what you spend and being really, really thoughtful in how you deploy it, 12 years of stacking Satoshis, even if it's a small amount, that can lead you to a place where with 30, you are fine. Like you have worked so hard that with 30, you can focus on building a family. You can focus on building bigger companies because you have now the means to that. And I don't want to say retire with 30 because like what's there? Like it's a little bit early to say like, oh, I won't do anything, because with 30, you have a lot of energy and you should use that energy productively. And I think everyone that retires with that young age probably goes either crazy or back to work after a few years. And so having the means to like change your life massively with that young age is huge. And so that's why I'm super happy that I now see people that are around 20 years old, now actually speaking about Bitcoin. We have Joey, in Australia. We have Nikki. I think she's originally from America, and we have so many more young people that are now under my age and still producing Bitcoin content. Think about how many speakers there are that you know of that are regularly speaking on conferences that are younger than me. Like they're not a lot. Like they're very, you can count them on one freaking hand. And how many people are there that speak regularly on Bitcoin conferences that are above my age? Like you need a lot of hands for that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that the big challenge for Gen Z is growing up in a fiat world that is at the end of its reign, effectively. I think most of us Bitcoiners would agree with that. So they're growing up in a world where consumerism is shouting in their face every single day. So their friends are buying designer clothes with money they haven't really got. They're trying to project a certain image on social media. So I think education, and obviously as a parent, trying to instill some of the Bitcoin mindset without being kind of like some cult leader to my children, but just try and give them the education of the importance of work and trying to store the value of what you're creating. So yes, if you want to go and buy yourself a top because you're going out with friends at the weekend. Of course you can do that, but at the same time, make sure that's only a little bit of what you've earned, and more of what you've earned needs to be being put away for that future you, because a small amount now is going to be worth an awful lot later.
Yeah. But we actually talked about that before. I just remembered it's like there's this hard thing that you want to save for your future, but you also want to spend your Bitcoin and enjoy life to improve your life. And I think a lot of Bitcoiners actually have probably the opposite problem, that they want to hold on to their Bitcoin more than they should. Like they almost like they don't want to sell it. And it's like almost like a mental block where they like, I don't want to sell my Bitcoin. I don't want to spend my Bitcoin. I will keep my stack till I die. How do you think we can have a healthy balance where we spend our Bitcoin, but also like not spend on stupid stuff?
I heard on a podcast a while ago, someone said, sell your Bitcoin when it can make a significant difference and improvement to your life. I think that's a good way of looking at it. Clearly, it's a very personal thing. For one person, an improvement to their life might be a Lambo on the drive. That isn't for me. I wouldn't say no, but before the Lambo comes, there's lots of other things before that would be higher on my list of priorities. I mean, I'm 7 years away from being able to access my pension. If I get to a point where I think I could sell some of my sats and it would allow me to finish work sooner and enjoy more of my time while I'm at a reasonable age, healthy, fit, wanting to go and travel and do things, then that would be great, and spend more time with the children and do things with the children. And whereas if I just stack and stack and stack and stack, well, what's the point of that in the end? Because if I die and just leave it to my kids, how do I know what they're going to do with that? They could both have Lambos on the drive and spend it in a way that I didn't want to when I was alive, and I wouldn't have wanted them to do, but it's then out of my control. So I do think every Bitcoiner should have a plan as they get older. I mean, again, you're not going to ask an 18-year-old to have a plan for their Bitcoin for when they're in their 50s or 60s. But and maybe I'm talking more personally for people my age. But if you're in your 40s, in your 50s, and your mindset is I'm just hodling this forever and I'm stacking forever, I think you need to ask a pretty serious question to yourself. Is like, well, why? What's the benefit to you and to your life and to your loved ones of just stacking? At some point it should improve your life.
There's also this interesting thing with leaving money for your kids. And I'm like, I don't want to speak too much about it because I don't have kids, so I cannot really feel into that feeling of like what people have with that. But when I look at it from first principles, I think first of all, I think the most valuable thing you can give a kid is the most valuable thing a kid can receive from their parents is their mindset and belief set, and not their money. And so I think giving also a kid a lot of money can be a burden on him. We know all those stories from like trust fund kids. And so maybe in the future, it's not trust fund kids, but maybe in the future, it's like, Bitcoin OG kids, things like that. Because if you get a lot of money that you haven't earned yourself, I think it can, and I can only speak from, because I've never got a lot of money, from what I hear from other people, from people that got a lot of money outside of what they've earned. I even know a good friend of mine, his father was extremely successful, and he really grew up with all this wealth, with like 7 cars in the garage and all of that. And he and I have a good relationship with him, and he said like it's hard. Like it sounds so weird because it's like, yeah, like you just like it's a spoiled problem, and like you should be grateful for what we get, but it's almost like you want to step in the footstep of your father. And if they're so huge and you get so much money, even if you make it, even if you make your own way, you always have that weird voice somewhere that says like, yeah, you only got to the point that you are because of your dad. you only got to the point of what you did because you got so much money of your parents. And weirdly enough, I think getting a lot of money from your parents might just be not a good thing for development. I'm not an expert in this at all. It's just something that I strongly more and more believe in. The more stories I hear about trust fund kids, the more and more I hear about like wealth and giving it to the kids. Yeah. Have you any thoughts about that?
Yeah. So obviously Bitcoiners talk a lot about proof of work. I think if you inherit a significant amount of money, particularly if you're younger, then how can you be expected to really know what the value of money is? Because you haven't really had to do anything for it. So you can't conceptualize what had to be done in order to earn the money that you've just inherited. And so I think that's really important. And I agree that leaving kids so much money, like if you've stacked so much just for your kids and you're sitting on a stash that would materially improve your life, then leaving all of that to your kids potentially, in my opinion anyway, is probably irresponsible, because it's not really setting them up for, it's just giving everything to them on a silver platter. I think giving your children, as you said, the mindset, the education and the confidence to try and pursue what they want to pursue in life and just be happy. I mean, my daughter's just finished her A-levels. She doesn't really want to go to university because there's nothing that particularly jumps out at what she wants to do. And my wife and I have said, like, happiness and trying to find something that you want to do is more important than just going off to university, so that when we're at the queue in the supermarket, we can tell our friends that our daughter's going off to university. Because I think for some parents, it is a bit of a, it's a bit of a brag. It's not always the child that wants to go. Sometimes it's the parent wants the child to go. So she's going to do some traveling next year. She's working now, earning money, doing, working in a supermarket to earn some money. And in my opinion, at 18 years old, that's giving her a good grounding of what money is, how it works, the fact that she needs to do something to try and preserve that wealth, because leaving it in as pounds, it's going to devalue pretty quickly. But going traveling with her cousin for 4 months, she's going to come back a different person. And whether that means she then thinks she does want to go to university and do something, or wants to do an apprenticeship, or just start something independently on her own. I think where inheritance helps the younger generation is if it enables them to follow a passion rather than be led by following a desire for money. And I think so many people, me included, not so much now, but when I was younger, the fact that people want promotions and bigger jobs and more responsibility and more money, bigger bonuses, that comes at a price, doesn't it? And often people don't enjoy those jobs more, and often they don't even get the time to enjoy the extra remuneration that comes with it, because they're working more hours, they're away from home for longer, they might not see their kids as much. At the weekends, they're completely mentally shattered because they've worked crazy hours through the week. That's not sustainable and that's not enjoyable. But that's what the fiat world we live in is almost encouraging us to do. So Bitcoin does change that. I think when you discover Bitcoin, you look completely differently at all of those things.
100%. And I think in the beginning of my podcast, I tried to figure out the Bitcoin path that people take. That's why I think for the first 10 episodes, it was even called the Bitcoin path. And I've asked so many questions around what did change with Bitcoin? When you discover Bitcoin, what changed? I no longer do this because it's a very repetitive story, but you literally get exactly those things, the different belief sets, the different perspectives on lives. And the antithesis to not giving your kids all the money would be to build generational wealth, as we also talked before, of you want to, because it's a hard topic. It can be a burden on someone. children to just inherit a lot of money. But maybe the best way is to prepare them that when you are dying, they already have a lot of money themselves. They already built something for themselves. And then the money that they get from you is just like an added thing on there that they can build on there. And so I think it's such a hard topic for me, because on the one hand, I feel like if a person gets money they don't deserve, we see it with lottery winners. We see it with people that win the lottery. They're usually more broke after 3 years or 5 years than they were before the lottery. So it's like they are just they cannot handle money. And then we see those. Have you seen this? There's a really great series, I forgot the name, where they take a successful entrepreneur and they just put him somewhere, and he has to have like in 90 days a business that's worth like $1 million, something like that. It's a great series, and I was like, oh, I don't know how much scripted it is or like how real it really is, but I always assume the best from people, so I assume it's real. And so if it doesn't really real, it shows so good, like how someone with nothing can build himself up because he knows the skills, the mindset, and the things that he needs to know to build a new business. So I truly believe that someone that has the right mindset and for some reason loses the Bitcoin or like loses the access to his Bitcoin and all of that, he can rebuild that because he has the right mindset. And so maybe generational wealth has also a lot to do, not just with the money itself, but like with mindset and all of that, which is a whole different topic, but I think very important, especially because I think there are a lot of Bitcoin OGs in the audience that will face the question of what they will have to do with their huge stack of Bitcoin once they get to 60 years old, to 80 years old, to 90 years old, because death comes closer. You have kids and you're like, oh, like I have to like ask myself the question, what do I do? How do I prepare my family? Inheritance planning, all of that. Like it's so freaking important and nobody talks about it because nobody wants to talk about death.
Yeah. I think it's interesting as we're talking about this. I think generational happiness is more important than generational wealth. So if when you die, you're passing it on to children, potentially grandchildren, who aren't really set up for happiness within their life, then that wealth is probably going to be detrimental to them because they could take the wrong path, get involved with the wrong people, spend money on things that don't actually bring them happiness. They're just material things that sometimes bring detriment to their life. Whereas I think if you're passing on your wealth to a family setup where people are independently happy, let's call it that, even if they're not massively wealthy, if they're happy and content and have got the right mindset, then even inheriting a lot of money is less likely to set them off on a different and a wrong path. It's more likely just to improve their life further. So maybe that's a reflection as Bitcoiners. We need to worry more about generational happiness that we're creating rather than generational wealth.
Yeah, I think George Boudin does great things on that. I think he has an amazing, interestingly, Twitter post that he puts out there. You're aware of George Boudin, right?
Yeah, he's great. Yeah.
And he puts out those things where they sometimes really make me think of like, what do we do with our time? What do we do with our Bitcoin? Because I truly think, and it's a weird thing to say, but I think everyone that is watching here and kind of saying why we hodl Bitcoin, they understand Bitcoin, they understand what the properties of Bitcoin are, and they understand how proof of work can really benefit them. They will have a huge problem in 10 years. They have more money than they ever had. And they're like, what do I do with that? What do I do with my life? And then all of a sudden you no longer have to work. Then the question is like, why do I stand up in the morning if I don't have to work for money? All of a sudden you have to question those things. Then you have to ask yourself the question, like, what do I really want to be known for? Like, what really is my legacy? And then it's like, oh, okay, what if I die? Like, how should I progress with my stack? So really interesting topics. It's very, it's hopefully very far away from me. But you never know. And so I think even young people, I think once you get to a state where you have a big enough stack that could change someone else's life, you should think about inheritance, even if you're 20 years old. I think if your stack is big enough to change someone else's life, you should definitely think about inheritance, and especially if you do self-custody. Obviously, if you have it in an ETF or you have it somewhere else, like there are things for that, and there's like the state kind of takes care of that. But if you have it in self-custody, gosh, like think about inheritance. Like don't be selfish.
Definitely.
One thing that I was curious about, because you said like in 7 years you get your state pension out. Well, how do you look at state pension in general? Like I don't know how it's in UK, but you probably have to kind of pay in that. And what's your kind of how do you see state pension currently?
Yeah, well, sorry, it's not a state pension in 7 years. My personal pension is called a SIP in the UK, which is a self-invested personal pension. So that's money that every month my employer and I put money into. I've then consolidated those and I've invested in things like strategy historically and things. So I've tried to be as Bitcoin in my pension as I am outside of my pension, but because it's trapped capital, I can't get access to that until I'm 57. State pension won't be till I'm 67. And I mean, I've got views. I think different countries will get to different situations. I think in the UK and maybe across a lot of Europe, it may end up that in the next 10, 15 years, it becomes significantly devalued, either by hyperinflation, where the state just can't keep up with making the pension the same level it's at, or they'll start changing the rules and start saying, actually, it's means tested now. So if you want, even though you've, in theory, been paying in the UK, it's called national insurance, which is an amount that goes on top of that gets taken out of your salary, that is, in theory, going towards your state pension. But all that's doing every month that I pay it is paying current pensioners. And even that isn't covering the bill because we're so much in debt, we're still borrowing money every month. So I think pensions in total as a plan for retirement are going to be increasingly risky, even more so for the younger generation. I may end up with my personal pension, some of the rules being degraded slightly. So the amount I can take out as a tax-free lump sum, this government or a future government might reduce that. The amount of tax I have to pay on a withdrawal, they might increase that. They may even say you can't have a pot bigger than X. And if it is, we're just going to take that off you. All of those things are completely out of my control. The money I've got in there now that I've contributed over the years, all I can try and do is maintain that, grow it as much as I can, and hope the rules don't change. But this is not financial advice, clearly, but talking to a 20-year-old, 25, 30-year-old now, they have to be so aware that the next 30 years of their life or longer, the amount of changes that could happen, contributing into a wrapper that is for your pension, that you've got virtually no control over the rules. And there is history proves that governments of all shapes and sizes and colours change those rules because they have to, because they haven't got enough money and the money printing can't keep up fast enough. So we come back round to Bitcoin, of course, but some Bitcoin in self-custody is going to do so much better, I believe, for the younger generation, even though putting money into a pension gives you tax breaks. The risks now, I think, are greater than they ever have been, that governments will just change those rules and make it harder for you.
I think I asked that every single one of my friends who are curious about pension and all of that from the state versus doing it yourself. I asked them, do you trust the government enough to give them all your money now? And they give you some of the money back when you are 70, 80 years old. Most of my environment says no. Like, why would I give all my money to the government? Then I asked them, why would you give them any money of yours? Like, why do you trust them with any type of money that you are now giving them without having to give them? I mean, you have to pay taxes and all of that, but beyond the obligatory tax, beyond the thing that you have to give them, why do you give them more? And so I think more and more young people actually wake up to the reality that the government probably can't take care of my pension. So I have to take care of my pension myself. So I'm not like 70 years old and have to go back to work because my pension is not enough. And it's almost spooky, but also still like a good development that most of my colleagues that are young as me or even younger than me, they are saying, oh, I don't trust the government at all, that they give me a pension. Like, not at all. Like, I know they collect money, but I just assume the money will be gone forever. And I'm like, it's a sad thing to say. It's a very sad thing to say. But at the same time, I'm happy that you say that because you will be prepared for what's to come, because you see the reality and the truth to it.
Yeah, definitely. I think in the UK particularly, there are quite big tax incentives. And particularly if you start earning over a certain salary, you know, the amount of tax that you save by contributing into a pension is significant. For younger people, less so. But as much as I wouldn't, my daughter pays into a pension, but it's a relatively small amount. And I've said to her it's worth doing because the company she works for are quite generous with the percentage they put on top of that. So at 18 years old, if you're having to forego a little bit of your take-home pay for a reasonable amount going in to a pension that's going to sit there that you can't touch for 50 years, is probably not the worst thing in the world. Because the other thing with any sort of investing, Bitcoin or otherwise, you have to be very strong individually not to tap into that. I've done it in my past. I started doing a savings account, you know, right, this is for my future. And then 6 months later, I want to book a holiday. I'll just take the money out of that. You know, I'm sure most people have all been there and done it. Obviously, the further you start getting into the Bitcoin rabbit hole, the more some of those mindsets change. But yeah, I do think you have to balance these things. It's not necessarily one thing is right and one thing is wrong. Everything has risks. Everything has benefits. There's pros and cons. You need to weigh it all up and decide what's best for you.
I want to tell you about something very special to me. It's called Microseed. If you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you should, you know how critical it is to secure your seed phrase. You should not have them on paper. You should not have them on anything else than titanium. With Microseed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because Microseed is not selling the washer. Microseed is selling the device that stamps the washer. So you get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today. And you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io. Again, that's microseed.io to get your last backup tool you ever need. The most important thing for your Bitcoin journey is not buying Bitcoin, but it's how to keep them. And yes, you have maybe the right tools, but how do you actually go ahead and stick it all together so it's the most secure for you personally? Self-custody is a deeply personalized journey, and the Bitcoin way, is helping you exactly finding that correct setup for you personally. They are also helping you with securing your own cybersecurity. And if you want to go one step above all that, you can even get a consultation for a Plan B residency. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Robin and you will get a 30-minute free consultation. I finally and officially mine Bitcoin. This is not just something to stack more Satoshis, but it's most importantly also to support the network. Individual miners are the ones that keep the Bitcoin network decentralized. And by the way, you get KYC free Bitcoin. That's why I use simplemining. I get an actual proper Bitcoin miner. They set it up for me. They repair it if it breaks down. And most importantly, they let me choose the pool and even connect my own full node. I'm completely sovereign and I'm completely in control, and I can sign up with Ocean, no account needed. I just give them a Bitcoin address and then there's mining going on. No KYC, nothing. So if you're ready to mine Bitcoin, go to simplemining.io, tell them you come from Robin, and let's mine Bitcoin together. How do you actually look at because it seems like, and we talked about it before, it seems like there's the one part that says like only hold Bitcoin in self-custody. And the other one's like, no, like I'll just keep it on exchange, just keep it on ETFs. And it's not as clear cut as it might be. How do you look at the pros and cons for those things?
I think the most important thing is giving people that are new to Bitcoin, that are just discovering Bitcoin, as many opportunities as possible to get hold of some. Now, if that means someone's just putting £50 on an exchange and hopefully not being tempted by other crypto, but are saying, I'm going to put £50 into Bitcoin on, name the exchange. It's not ideal leaving it on there, but frankly, £50, it's not the end of the world. And having those on-ramps, I think, is really important. Ultimately, you would hope that those individuals continue their journey of knowledge and start to understand that if you don't hold the keys to your coins, they're not your coins. So having Bitcoin on an exchange, if that exchange goes under, you've lost them. Likewise with things like ETFs, or they've just been, in the UK, the FCA, which is the Financial Conduct Authority, have just allowed Bitcoin ETNs, which are, for all intent and purposes, they're the same as the Bitcoin ETFs in America, really. But the Bitcoin ETNs to be allowed in tax-free savings accounts and your pension. Now, again, a lot of hardcore Bitcoiners absolutely turn their nose up at that. However, if someone is looking to save some money now for, as an example, a house deposit for 5 years' time, they want to buy a new car. They're going to need to buy a new car in 5 years' time, and they want to put that in Bitcoin. Now, my view would be putting that in a tax-free wrapper in a Bitcoin ETN is going to give your fiat the price exposure and volatility of Bitcoin for a very, very small fee. And if Bitcoin goes up 2, 3, 5, 10 times, you can take that fiat, you could sell that fund to realize that fiat gain and take that fiat out completely tax-free and buy that car or pay that deposit for the house that you want to move into because you're getting married, having kids, whatever it may be. If you do that all in self-custody in Bitcoin, in the UK and in most countries, not all countries, some of the European countries, if you hold it for a certain amount of time, there's no tax to pay. But if you follow that same approach in the UK, you would have the same, your Bitcoin in fiat terms would appreciate the same amount. In fact, ever so slightly higher because of the fees associated with holding a Bitcoin fund. However, when you went to sell that, if it's gone up 1, 3, 5, 10 times, you're going to have to pay the government 18, 20, 25% of the gains because they come after you for your money. It's capital gains tax. So the government put this scheme in place. In the UK, it's called an ISA, individual savings account, where all of the gains that you make in that are tax free. So as much as we all hate fiat, we all hate a lot of the things that governments do and the financial system and banks and all of that stuff, completely get it. But as an individual, I think it's nuanced, and you need to think about where you are in your life journey and your financial life journey, what money you're going to need in the next 1, 3, 5, 10, 20, 40 years. The further out you're looking, I think the more it ticks the box of spot Bitcoin in self-custody, because some of these pernicious tax rules and things are likely to change in our favor, honestly, I believe, in the long term. However, in the shorter term, would you rather have money sitting in a 5% savings account or money sitting in a tax-free wrapper aligned to Bitcoin in an ETN? Yes, there are still risks involved with that, but I think it's an important discussion point in Bitcoin that a lot of Bitcoiners, I don't know, don't want to talk about it, don't still are so purist about it that they feel it's just being dirty to think about it.
It is super interesting because there's practicality of it that you just described, but also there's the amount of how many Bitcoin you actually have. So I would say if you have all you have is like $500 in Bitcoin, it is very hard to argue that you should buy a hardware wallet, metal stamping, or like whatever, because it takes probably more money to buy all the tools to proper do self-custody than you have money in Bitcoin. And so up to a certain amount, just buy the Bitcoin and keep it on exchange. Try to get the safest exchange. Try to like pick a nice one and just keep it there, or have a mobile wallet. I mean, I always have a mobile wallet where I have Bitcoin on chain to like spend and receive easily. Now there, I don't have a lot of them. It's just like enough to pay like 1 month of my freelancers or receive some money, and it just goes in and out there. And this is just like a transactional wallet, but I have some money in there. And so this is the thing that people have to realize. It does matter how much Bitcoin you have, depending on your self-custody setup. If you have 0.001 Bitcoin, your security and self-custody setup should look very differently when you have 100 Bitcoin, like very, very differently. And so it is not always like, oh, you have to put it on metal and you have to do multi-signature and you have to spread it, like all those things, and decoy wallets and stuff like that. If you have $2,000 in Bitcoin, like you don't have to do all those things. If you have $2 million in Bitcoin, like you should do all those things. Like invest a lot of money that they are secure, because you have a big honeypot, and the chances are that someone knows about that is not that low. You bought the Bitcoin somewhere, you got it somewhere. Maybe it's in some like KYC leak on the black market, like somewhere, and they get in some account. If you are sloppy with your self-custody, they're quicker gone than you think. And cracking, this is a thing. People always think about self-custody in like the exchange goes bust, but the exchange doesn't need to go bust. Your account just needs to go bust. Like a hacker finding out your password, figuring out like SIM swap, or like getting through this two-factor authentication on an exchange is a lot easier than getting into your Bitcoin in self-custody. So yeah, I'm very vocal about self-custody, but I'm also practical about it. If you have $1,000 in Bitcoin, don't buy like $500 of equipment for self-custody. Like that's like pretty obvious thing not to do. Accumulate more, have maybe a mobile wallet. It's also self-custody. And then over time, you can invest in better things and in better protection for your seed phrase and for your stack.
Yeah, I think the other thing, the longer people are in Bitcoin, the more they're likely to forget just how difficult it can be for a lot of people to understand all the complexities of self-custody. And there's probably a bigger risk. I think most Bitcoiners would agree with this if they really thought about it. Someone brand new into Bitcoin, there's a much bigger risk of them losing the Bitcoin themselves by doing self-custody incorrectly than there is of leaving it on an exchange and that exchange going belly up and them losing their Bitcoin. there are risks in both. However you buy, however you store your Bitcoin, there are risks, aren't they? It's just evaluating what those risks are and how committed you are to really exploring the pros and cons and understanding the options as well for self-custody, because there's products like BitKey where there isn't a seed phrase. I think it's great as a way in for someone who wants to get off an exchange but doesn't want to go down the route of stamping metal plates and hiding them somewhere and trying to explain to their loved ones they need to go and find these things and put them together and go on this. This is how you can recover it. BitKey has built-in inheritance planning and all those kind of things. If your wife, if your children have one as well, you can set that all up so there are different tools. And I think the other thing is that's going to grow over time as well. 2 years ago, BitKey didn't exist. In 2-3 years' time, who knows what other self-custody options might be available that are equally as sound, but hopefully more accessible and easy for plebs to embrace.
I have this weird theory that most people won't care about self-custody. And they will use the most convenient tool they have. There's like this 80-20 rule, and there's a lot of like those theories of like how many people actually care about the sovereignty, how many people do care about like privacy and sovereignty in the internet, and how many people actually just like don't care about that. And so with Bitcoin self-custody, there is a scale to that. So there is the least amount of self-custody where you just have a Bitcoin ETF or a Bitcoin exchange or something like that. And then there's the most amount of self-custody where you don't rely on any third party. You just do it with like paper wallet or like a metal seed plate, or like you don't even like have signing devices. You just try to like do it maybe with like a seed sign or something like that. So you're going very far down the multi-sig and like the hard cold wallet, hard stamping, however you want to call that corner of the internet, that route that I very much recommend for people, because I want to push people to as close to that corner as possible. But there's many different solutions in between that. For example, a self-custody wallet on your phone where you just back up your seed phrase somewhere is already great. Then you have maybe a multi-signature device like the BitKey, where you have to trust a lot into BitKey because there's no like display and all of that, but it's a lot better than just keeping it on exchanges. And so there is different security aspects and different different setups for different people. Most people will stay closest to the convenient solution. So most people will stay as close as possible to keeping on exchanges. And only a few people will go down the rabbit hole of really securing. Because I had recently a coffee with an old IT security colleague of mine, and he told me, "Oh, I need to do all those things with my home internet. I need to protect it from all those different angles." And he's probably right. And I will slowly implement those things. But it's a lot of work and it's a lot less convenient. The most convenient thing is just like you buy the router, you plug it in your wall, you have internet. There you go. Yeah. But actually that's not very secure. If you really want to have a secure internet home setup, you have to invest more money and more time to have more knowledge about all those things that go on. And the thing is like, does it make sense for you? If you have a lot of asset to protect, if you are a wealthy individual, if you are maybe a famous individual, if you are doing anything like huge, it probably makes sense to invest in those things. But if not, then probably not. The convenient way is there. And so that's why I also say for people, it matters what attack vector you have. How big is the target on your back, and this should be a critical point of how huge your investment into self-custody should be, because self-custody just means IT security. There's always there's you have self-custody or not. There's not an on-off button. I come from IT security, so I know that very well. It's with IT security, you never have an on-off button. You just have a spectrum of how secure you want to be. And this should be a deciding factor. For example, I came from the website security, and we did basically a fire alarm for websites. This does not make sense if you have one website. It has no, if you just have one domain, one website, it does not make sense to have that. But if you are having 10,000 domains, and we had customers that had over 10,000 domains, then you probably want to have a fire alarm, because how the hell will you know what's going on the 10,000 domains with an IT security department of 7 people? And so it all comes down for me of how big is the target on your back? And then decide from there how much money you want to invest in your overall physical security, in your IT security, in your infrastructure, in your self-custody setup, and all of that. And so it's a very complicated question. And that's why I think the more self-custody solution we have, like BitKey or many other signing devices and many other implementations, the better it is.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, when they first come across, when a normie finds Bitcoin, they're still going to be entrenched in the existing financial system, right? So they're still going to have their bank account, their investment accounts, whatever, and they will be trusting those institutions. So opening up an exchange app and putting some fiat in there to buy Bitcoin, the last thing they would think about is not trusting that will be there the next day when they log in. So I think I'm inclined to agree that most people won't care that much about self-custody until something happens that makes them change their mind. So obviously history shows us some countries have overnight, governments have taken money out of civilian bank accounts. It has happened. You've also got, to a lesser extent, things like hyperinflation. But, if suddenly there's a European country that goes bust and takes money out of civilian bank accounts, that's going to make people all over the rest of Europe think, oh, if they can do it there, maybe they'll do it here. And I think eventually, and I've got no idea, conceptually that could be next month, next year, next decade, next century, who knows? There was a lot of people that could talk a lot more intelligently than I can about that. I think often, and I've heard you say this before, people think things are going to change more quickly than they do, and actually, usually, it takes a bit longer. So yeah, I do think that will change over time because of how fiat is inevitably going to impinge on the trust that people have with the current institutions and financial setup, but it will take a while.
Yeah, I had a presentation in Bulgaria, and I kind of distilled it down to one sentence. People underestimate the impact that Bitcoin will have on the world, but they overestimate the speed of adoption to which we come to that world. And so I think we all had that kind of experience when we first got into Bitcoin. We all thought, Bitcoin will overtake the world next Monday, and we have to really plug all our money now into Bitcoin, because otherwise we'll lose out. I mean, Seyr described it very well, that he had that feeling, and I think most people can relate to that feeling of I figured out now, put all the money in, because tomorrow it goes to $2 million. And it probably won't. There could be that case that all of a sudden there's a huge event and we rip from 110k to 200k next Monday to 250k next Tuesday to 3 million the next year. It can happen. I just don't think it's very likely. And so usually things take longer than we think, but they are more impactful than we anticipate. The last thing that I want to say on the self-custody front is, with great power comes great responsibility. Like that thing comes always in my mind, because you can put the power to completely someone else and say like, hey, you exchange, take care of my Bitcoin. And then you don't have the responsibility and you don't have the power. And so taking all your Bitcoin in self-custody is a lot of power, because you can, in your own way, get rid of all your wealth today. It's like you can just put it in some, send it to another wallet that you don't control, and all of a sudden all your Bitcoin is gone. The same power is harder to execute with a bank account, because if you have a lot of money in a bank account and you try to, like with one transaction, do all the money out, the transaction probably won't even go through. There's probably some safeguard that say like, oh, you really, was it you, not a fake, and all of that? So there's some safeguards and there's safety rails. And that great power has downsides. And I always say, if you don't trust yourself, like, don't do self-custody, because you will betray yourself. But you should trust yourself, and you should invest in your own skills, in the long run. But yeah, it's funny, because like I sometimes really have those conversations with people and say like, oh, I don't trust myself. Like, I don't want to hold that power. And I'm like, yeah, that's fair. Like, with the great power comes great responsibility. If you're not ready for that, like, don't do it.
Yeah. Can I just ask you, Robin, what's the capital gains tax situation in Austria?
Frustrating. We had the same rule that Germany has still, where if you hold it for a year or longer, you don't have to declare taxes and you don't have to pay taxes. I was in a lucky situation where most of my Bitcoin is still in that era. And so for most of my Bitcoin, I actually don't have to pay capital gains tax. But that will also be over at some point. And so right now, if you have Bitcoin and you sell it, you have to pay 27.5% capital gains tax, which is absurdly high. And there's not anything that you can really do against that outside of buying Bitcoin before February 2021, because there was the break where it was still for like every Bitcoin for like the Austrian people, every Bitcoin that you bought in Austria before February 2021, you can now spend without capital gains tax. And this is great for the people that were in before. I started buying in 2020, so I have some Bitcoin left from that era, but it will end at some point, and then it's like, oh shit, like capital gains tax.
So that conversation we had about ETFs and things, presumably there are tax-free wrappers in Austria as well that you could use instead of buying Bitcoin if you wanted to get your fiat exposure to Bitcoin growth with a view to spending it in the next few years for something.
I'm not aware of anything like that, but it might just be because I haven't researched that. So there is a forced pension you have to do in Austria that you have to pay in, and you cannot choose at all like, if you're an employee, you cannot even choose who you give it to. If you are self-employed or a company, you have basically 3 providers that you can choose from. And I researched them extensively. They all do the same thing. So you don't really have a choice.
Outside of pensions, though, if you've got a standard investment account, if you're buying stocks and shares, do you always have to pay capital gains tax?
I think so. I mean, I have to research. Maybe I can quickly ask AI, but I have never found, and I was not interested in that at all in the last couple of years, but I have never found an account where you can put money in tax free. Maybe there is something like that. Probably there is something like that. But I have never found it. I have to research that actually, because I've never really dove into that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if there is, in the UK, there is, which is why I was making the point that for people that want a relatively short term, say 5-year investment to buy something in 5 years' time, then those tax wrappers that we have in the UK are invaluable for that, excepting you're not buying Bitcoin. You're putting fiat into a Bitcoin fund. Whereas if in Austria there isn't that availability, then there is there's no obvious incentive other than if you're worried about self-custody to hold Bitcoin in an ETF, is there? Because you're better off just buying it, putting it in your own self-custody, because then if and when you sell it, you're paying capital gains tax, whether you've bought an ETF or spot Bitcoin.
I just searched it, and there is apparently not really something like that. There's apparently but apparently I cannot contribute, and I might be wrong here because I'm just doing a quick research. I might be wrong here because it's only for the specific pensions and funds that are actually there, and not really what I cannot buy strategy or like a Bitcoin ETF or something like that with that.
Yeah,
interesting.
It's only relating to a pension rather than just general savings and investments. Okay.
I guess so. Can I buy my own stocks in there? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, because as I say, they're two very different things in the UK. You've got a pension pot and you've got a individual savings account where you can buy and sell, withdraw funds. There's a limit to how much you can put in every year, but it's quite a big number. We can put £20,000 per adult. So if you're a married couple, you could put £40,000 in, buy Bitcoin ETN. If that doubles, you can take £80,000 out, and the tax man doesn't touch a penny. So that's as much as there are some bad things going on in the UK. That's quite a handy investment vehicle that we've got. This kind of tax-free savings wrapper.
There is literally, so as I understood it right now, apparently there's nothing like that in Austria. Okay. And that's sad. That's sad.
You'll have to move to the UK, Robin. We welcome you with open arms. You speak better English than most English people I know, so I'm sure you'd be fine.
Yeah, for language, I think I'm fine in the UK, in Australia, in America, everywhere where they speak English. But
we've also got very old, tall buildings with high ceilings, which would be great for you because you must bang your head everywhere you go.
Yeah, in Vienna, there are also those like old buildings where they have like very high ceilings, and it's usually the doors are so high that I can almost go with a straight hand in the air through the door, which is very rare because usually, like, even if I jump a little bit, like I bounce my head off because most doors are not as tall as me.
I think you are officially the tallest person I've had the pleasure of meeting.
Yeah, I'm not the tallest person that I ever met. So I've met actually taller people, but there's a weird thing where if someone meets someone tall, they want to compare him to some other tall person. And so I've met a lot of tall person in my life. It's kind of like a law of attraction there. Really cool. I have one question that I asked each and every one of my returning guests, and you have been on, I think, one time on the podcast, and you've been on now the second time. The question is, what have you learned outside of Bitcoin since your last appearance?
I think it is kind of related, but it is outside of Bitcoin to some extent, which is don't be afraid of taking action and just trying things and asking people for help. Because when it came, I'm going to go back to the conference again that we did this year. We had no experience of doing it. We just had conviction. It was something we wanted to do because we thought it would be the right thing to do for our town and for Bitcoin. But the generosity of sorry, it is going to come back to Bitcoin. Unfortunately, maybe it is the generosity of Bitcoiners, but just asking people for help and asking people to be involved and putting this out there. And it was amazing, so having the fear that actually I've got no experience in this thing. I don't think I can do it. Just do it. What's the worst thing that will happen? It might not work, but the chances are if you're passionate and you're coming about it with the right reasons, you'll find ways to make it work. I think too many people are worried about failure maybe. And I think what it's taught me is just, if it's something you really believe in and it's something you're committed to doing, even if you've got no experience in it, just put on your big boy pants and go for it. Because if you approach it with that mindset, the world and the universe, particularly the Bitcoin universe, will be on your shoulders and help you through it.
Yeah, I can 100% agree with that. I think anyone that saw my podcast journey saw how gracious people were with their time and with their efforts that they gave to my podcast now, and it's been fascinating to see how amazing Bitcoiners are in accepting new people and welcoming new people, and also respecting proof of work that someone puts in. This is the most amazing thing. People always respect the proof of work that you put in there and really want to help people that are putting in a lot of proof of work. So like 100%.
Yeah. I think the other thing, you've said this before on the podcast, but the importance of and the value you get from just meeting other Bitcoiners in real life, it genuinely can be life-changing. So anyone listening to this that has never been to a meetup, go to one. If there isn't one in your town, set one up. What's the worst that will happen is you'll sit on your own in a pub and have a drink and no one will turn up. The best thing that will happen is one other person will turn up and you'll spend an evening talking to a Bitcoiner about Bitcoin and find out they only live 10 streets away from you and you didn't know each other existed. So, I think more people can do more things around Bitcoin. You don't have to run a conference. You don't have to start a podcast, but, trying to get more Bitcoin into your life, whatever way is authentic to you, is something that's definitely worth pursuing, I think, because your life changes when you spend more time with Bitcoiners.
You don't have to start a podcast, but you should. That's always my message. Is like, you should create content in Bitcoin. You should make meetups. And if you can, you should make conferences. Like, there's so much, we are so early and there's so much space for new people. Like you 100% should do all those things. But of course nobody has to. And we can, like, there's small ways everyone can contribute, and like a meetup, or just going to a meetup, just being a part of the meetup is already amazing. And so meeting other people, though, 100%. And yeah, as you well know, we have an end routine on the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the previous guest asked you the question, do you run a node? Why or why not?
Well, I can answer that completely honestly, which is I bought the equipment to run one. I haven't set it up yet, which I know is a really bad excuse. Although the excuse I have at the moment is I've been busy doing lots of other things like the conference and bits and pieces. But, again, it's a sad reflection of life in general, of that lethargy of like, it's sitting in the corner waiting for me to do it. And I know it's not going to take me that long, but it's just getting around to it. So I don't yet, but I have full intentions of doing it. I just haven't quite got around to it yet.
Have you already decided what you will run? the most controversial question in Bitcoin currently, what implementation you will run?
No, honestly, I think once I've got it set up, I'll run both and just have a play and see what. I mean, that's part. Again, I've heard you talk about this, Robin. Is just do it and have a play and see what you think. And nothing's going to break. You're not going to break Bitcoin if you pick the wrong one. Just it's important to run a node. I have got a little miner. I've got a little a BitAxe miner that I run, but yeah, I'm completely fully aware that I do need to get my node up and running, but I just haven't got around to it yet.
Dasha might disagree with it does it doesn't matter, but I agree. It's like sorry, just to qualify that,
one node running, once my individual node is up and running, picking one or the other and having a play with both is what I'm saying. I don't mean it's irrelevant if everyone goes to one or everyone goes to another. I realize that's a much bigger topic and a very hot potato, but yeah.
It is, it's such I love this discussion and I hate it at the same time, because I hate the part that people are like, oh, you have to run this, you have to run this. You don't have to run this. Bitcoin is permissionless and you can run whatever software you want. I like it because it forces people to run their own node. It forces people to ask the question, what node do I run? Like what do I really do myself? Like, and being an economically active node in the network and being an active contributor to the network is extremely valuable to yourself and to the network. So I hate it and love it at the same time, this whole discussion. it's like, it has its bad and its good sides. I'm surprised how huge this discussion still is. And I have a feeling it will get a little bit more controversial, a little bit bigger before it turns off. And I'm really looking forward also to how Core will adjust, because I don't think they will be able to keep the op return so high as a default value. I think they have to kind of set it down, because clearly almost everyone agrees like there is no use case for that. But yeah, let's just not make another podcast about that whole topic. I have a lot of interesting opinions on that, but maybe they're just interesting for me. Before we get stopped with the podcast and before we let you go, where can people find you and ask you questions and reach out to you?
Yeah, so I'm on X as Smithy G. The Bitcoin conference, we're going to be running that again in September next year. That's on X as BSE, which is Bitcoin Sovereignty and Economics, or Bury St Edmunds, which is where it is. So it's a kind of a play on words there, BSE Conf. I'm on LinkedIn in a TradFi sense as Gary Smith. Yeah, that's it really.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gary, for being on. And also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.